Thank all of you for coming here because this is an important event. Hey Mobility has really pulled together a significant number of different ways of taking a look at alternative mechanisms to move us around in a city. I'm going to take a slightly different tact and look at mechanisms and a process to move freight around in a city because we're a logistics university. You would expect me to do that. Although I would think that similar types of thinking could be used for moving people around in a city as well. Freight is something that most of us try to put in the back of our minds and not in the forefront of what we think about. Yet if we live here in a city, we couldn't live here without the movement of freight. It supplies us with the food we eat, the things we are sitting upon, the construction that goes on around us, all of those things that we take for granted, but we just don't have in a city. We have to bring it here. And when we see the freight operators, the big trucks and those types of mechanisms that they use to move stuff around, normally we are upset because they're parking in the middle of the road, they're getting in our way, they drive slower than we do. But we should remember that without them, we couldn't live here. What I want to talk about is some research that we did and in an ongoing European Union project called Urbane, where we're looking at urban mobility, particularly from the perspective of freight, and trying to come up with how can we do this better. So what we did in this project is we looked at what was going on with urban logistics. And we looked at a number of different ways that people were trying to improve logistics performance in cities around Europe, including here in Hamburg. And if you look around, I think you see as you walk in here at the Hey Mobility presence, you see DHL's little three-wheeled delivery, electric delivery vehicle. You see many of those types of similar action or similar vehicles operating in different cities around Europe. And they're there to try and get away from having those big yellow trucks or the big brown trucks or whatever color truck you want operating in your community and doing something in a more sustainable fashion. We've seen a lot of these things going into operation around Europe, but what we have looked at is what does the potential of these different or alternative ways of delivering goods to your home or to the businesses in your community really mean for sustainable urban logistics. And the unfortunate thing we have found is that while they're very, very nice point solutions, they are not an integrated solution and therefore don't have the longest and most beneficial outcomes for sustainable logistics in a community. They're just too few, too small, and too disaggregated. And that leads to the title of my presentation today of why can't we just get along? And what I mean by that is that the DHLs of the world, the FedExes of the world, the Daxas of the world, the Hermes of the world, the UPS of the world, they don't like to play together. They want to be separate, and yet they are the big players that bring primarily the freight within your city, to the downtown area or into your community for your home deliveries. And without them playing together, we will still have a group of disaggregated delivery mechanisms. So what we've been looking at is how do we get a long-term solution going that actually benefits all players, including the big players who don't like to play well together. We've seen the innovations, much of what you're seeing here today, going on in communities around Europe, as I mentioned. And a common problem exists that they don't get all of the players to collaborate together. So we have lots of little bicycles going around, but no one is working together to consolidate flows and generate a uniform and sustainable delivery process. So when we look at UPS, when we look at FedEx, when we look at Hermes, when we look at DHL, and we talk to them, they are very suspicious of one another. They think that this player is going to steal some of my customers. I don't want to tell this player, this other player, what I am delivering because they may learn something about my business that I don't want them to know. So it's hard. It's hard for them to be working together with that level of suspicion. And it's also hard for many of the solutions that we see written up in the press to have long-term sustainable outcomes. So many of you may have seen what are called urban consolidation centers, these small boxes or larger containers, actually, that come into a community where we drop them off and then packages are brought in, and from that consolidation center we have electric mobility delivery mechanisms. None, and I have to say this very honestly, none of these urban consolidation center experiments have ended up being long-term solutions to the problem. And that's because of two factors. One, they add an additional handling process to the delivery of goods, which is a cost. So the cost of delivery goes up. And the other reason is that none of the players, I should say, that start out wanting to work with these consolidation centers end up wishing to absorb those costs, so they abandon them. And that's unfortunate because it is a good idea. Somehow we have to figure out how do we make that idea work. And that idea can only work if all of the players come together and begin to just get along. To think of this as the proper way. It's also important for all of you to understand that you're part of the problem. None of you want to pay for having something delivered to you. Now, we may raise our hand and say, oh, no, I would pay for that. But we have done studies after studies after studies. Nobody wants to pay. You're also a problem because you don't want your delivery to occur next week. You want it delivered this afternoon or tomorrow at the latest. So that drives planning. And that's a problem as well with coordinating all of these players and coming up with a sustainable solution. So we need to remember that some of our own actions are driving some of the problems. But I want to get back to collaboration. Collaboration is one of the key requirements for us to have sustainable logistics in a city. It requires thinking about how do we work together. And if we think of everybody being connected by some sort of device, and all of our packages being connected by some sort of device, we can take an analogy from the digital internet and think of delivery mechanisms as a physical internet. And if we take that analogy to a logical step forward in the physical world, that means that we can't have boundaries between what firms want to share and what they don't share. It means we need to have open communication, at least of the volumes and of the things that will be delivered, so that they can be delivered in an efficient fashion. And that process is a process that can only occur if we create trust. And trust can only be created if we create a trustworthy system. So the Urbane project that I mentioned we generated these certain findings out of is looking at how do we create trustworthy systems so all of these competitors can work together and not give up competitive information, and at the same time leads to an outcome that we want, which is sustainable urban logistics. So collaboration between competing partners is something we're focusing on, and it needs to be the focus that allows us to create the most benefit in last mile delivery. So if we can get everyone to work together, then we have a sustainable outcome. Incremental improvements, like we see out here with some of the small delivery electric vehicles that you see on display here, are not a total solution for last mile delivery. There's too much volume. We have way too many packages, way too many large items that have to be delivered that would have secondary or tertiary delivery mechanisms if all we were thinking about are small parcel delivery systems. So we need something more. So to effectively integrate these things, we need to take a look at different ways of looking at the system of urban logistics, not simply looking at it as a disaggregated set of optimized individual activities, but looking at the city itself as an urban optimizer for the flow of goods, just like the flow of people. One of the most significant things, or barriers, if we will, to collaboration is building that trust, as I mentioned. And trust is generated only if you know someone, and if the system within which you know that individual allows you to verify. You can think of friendships, you can think of all sorts of things that you have invested trust in that have unfortunately failed. We need a system that is trustworthy so that the people who currently don't trust one another will trust one another. And that's really where we are trying to drive. So if we look at this, we need shared goals, we need incentives that are compatible with one another, we need relationships and communications that increase trust and foster some sort of collaborative environment. And collaboration means that the city itself, the city of Hamburg, or whichever city you're from, needs to get together with the major stakeholders and bring them under an umbrella of discussion and then finally systemic integration so that the city itself can manage an urban logistics environment that is appropriate for the city. Even here in Hamburg, we have almost no data on deliveries. And Hamburg is one of the more advanced cities in Europe in the area of freight logistics. Yet we have very limited data on who is going into which community, which of the neighborhoods, doing delivery, how often, when are they there, all of the statistics that you need. A few improvements, a few initiatives, and we can start to see things grow. And linking together all of this work can lead us to an environment where perhaps we have something that does resemble a physical internet, which would be beneficial for everyone, a network of networks, where the UPS network and the DHL network are connected together. Separate, managed by each company, but connected together in a manner that they can cooperate to do delivery where that's necessary. What we need to make this happen is willingness, obviously, to work together, and that's where the city and the stakeholder communications come in. We need something to move together, something to get people to come together, to talk together about what's necessary for them to collaborate. And we need governance structures that make sense for that kind of relationship. And those governance structures can be modeled after the internet, or they can be some other mechanism to try and pull people together so that we have a collaborative framework for delivery within the community. And if we do that, then we can have sustainable urban logistics. Otherwise, what we're going to have, unfortunately, is a continuation of you getting mad at all of the trucks that are in your way, and at the same time demanding delivery of whatever it is this afternoon to your apartment. So thank you. I think I got done in my 20 minutes.